Hello, and welcome to the Godly Playroom at First United Church in Wetaskiwin, Alberta. My name is Ruth Lummox, and it is my privilege to be able to be in this space and to share a story with you. As we begin today, know that you can pause the video whenever you want. It's a longer story today, and so you may need to pause, take a bathroom break, deal with something in the household, whatever works for you. But also know that the more focused and present you can be for the full session, the more chance there is of you going into that deep spiritual place where you might have a conversation with the Holy. To help you do that today, we will be sharing a story. You might like also to have something like a candle to light for our time together. You might want to have some art type materials, pencil, pen, paper for journaling, or some crayons or something to color or paint with or create shape with or knit. Lots of different ways. Sometimes when our hands are busy, our hearts and our minds open up to God in other ways. You might also like to have something for your feast. It doesn't have to be fancy. I think I've just got a muffin and a glass of water today. It is the company we keep. So if you need to pause the video now and go get some of those things ready, please do so. If you think you're ready to come in and be part of the circle, I'll invite you to take a deep breath. Maybe you need to set aside some things. Maybe, like me, you need to put your phone on airplane or vibrate mode so that we aren't interrupted that way. I like to be in this room when there's no one else in the building because sometimes there are a lot of distracting noises. So let's take another deep breath. Let you settle into your cozy spot, your comfortable spot, and be open to the gift of God's presence and to knowing yourself as beloved. We remember that once there was someone who said such amazing things and did such wonderful things that people began to follow him. And the more they followed him, the more they wondered who he was. And one time they just had to ask, "Who are you?" And one time when they asked him that question, he said, "I'm the light." That light shines. It's so deep in the candle today and reminds us that we are not alone. We're in that season of Epiphany still. A few more weeks until we come to the time of the color purple. But that season of Epiphany is a time when we are mindful of the light and those insights, those moments of aha, when things become clear. And sometimes that happens when we set off in another direction, maybe not a familiar way, but we discover that God is leading us in new and different ways. So I'll invite you to take another deep breath. In through the nose and out through the mouth. Maybe roll your shoulders a little bit and get settled in. I'm going to set things up here for the story, and I'll see you back here in a moment. We are still in this most curious box that looks something like a sacred story, the way it stands up tall on the sacred story shelf. But it's gold and in a box, like a parable that sometimes are closed to us, even when we think we're ready. And it has these purple crosses on it that remind us of the mystery of Easter. But it's not a liturgical action story. Well, let's see what it has for us today. We've heard this story without words and with some words. The 3 key moments and something about Jesus' ministry in Galilee. And today we move into Jesus' ministry in Judea as he goes towards Jerusalem for the last time. There is no underlay with this story, but then again, this box contains all the stories in the room. So I found this underlay, which may or may not be big enough for everything that we tell today, but this story is bigger than any underlay. We remember those 3 key moments. The Annunciation, when the Spirit of God overshadowed Mary and a child was born. And the Transfiguration, when the Spirit of God overshadowed Jesus and the disciples recognized him alongside Moses and Elijah. And the resurrection, when the Spirit of God overshadowed death and life happened. In that ministry in Judea, in Galilee, we remember Jesus going to the synagogue to read from the scroll of Isaiah. But the crowds were blind to who he was. We might not have been any different had we been there. And his work was so big, he began to call the disciples, those fishing folk along the shores of the Galilee. And wherever he went, the crowds gathered, and he began to teach. And so he taught sometimes on the hillsides and sometimes on the plain. And he fed people. One time, even a group of almost 5,000. But not everybody who followed him liked him. And so we remember that time where the Pharisees and the scribes came curious about the Sabbath and Jesus' teachings. They had a conversation in the grain field. And Jesus went up the mountain. The Spirit of God overshadowed him. And Peter and James and John saw Moses and Elijah. And when they went down that hill, they headed towards Jerusalem for the last time. They probably followed the pilgrim's path that wound along the River Jordan. And then they would have turned west into Jericho, one of the oldest cities in the world. And as they were coming into the city, there was a blind man along the side of the road. His name was Bartimaeus. And when he heard Jesus was coming, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." The people around him told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more louder. And Jesus heard him, and he stopped and called Bartimaeus to him. And Bartimaeus sprang up and he hurried through the crowd towards the sound of Jesus' voice. And Jesus asked him, "What do you want?" And Bartimaeus said, "I want to see." And Jesus said, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And Bartimaeus did go his way, but his way was to follow Jesus and the others to Jerusalem, because now he could truly see. Wherever Jesus went, the people gathered. Even parents brought their children to him to be blessed. You can see Jesus here, looking down the road to the mother who is bringing her children. And the disciples are looking somewhere else. One time, when the parents were bringing their children, the disciples tried to push them away. Perhaps they didn't want them to bother Jesus. But when Jesus heard this, he was indignant. And he said, "Let the children come to me. Do not turn them away, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of heaven belongs." Another time when he gathered the children in his arms and blessed them, he said something like, "Whoever welcomes one such child welcomes me and the one who sent me." It was as if he was saying that welcoming children was another way to come close to God. But for all the people who traveled alongside, who liked Jesus, there were those who did not. The Sadducees and the Pharisees were concerned about what Jesus was teaching, and they wanted to hear what he thought about the law and whether he kept the Torah. And so they asked him many questions. And one time, a lawyer came to him and asked, "What is the most important commandment?" Which was a bit of a trick question because all of the commandments are important. Jesus thought for a moment, and then he said, "The most important commandment is to love God." And the second commandment is also about love. To love others as yourself. These two commandments sum up everything in the law and the prophets. One of the scribes said, "You have answered very well." And the Pharisees and the Sadducees went away impressed. When Jesus and the disciples were in Jericho, they met Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was rich, but he was a tax collector, which means he took money from his neighbors and gave it to the Romans. And everybody hated him, just as they hated all the tax collectors or anybody who worked for the Romans. One day, when Zacchaeus heard that Jesus was coming, he was curious, and he wanted to see. He was strangely drawn to Jesus. But he couldn't see him over the crowds, and so he climbed a sycamore tree, hoping to get a better look. When Jesus passed by, he looked up, and he saw Zacchaeus, and he said, "Come down. I'm going to stay at your house today." And Zacchaeus did. And he showed them the way to his home. But the crowds were very confused and upset. What was Jesus doing having supper with Zacchaeus? He was a sinner after all. But even Zacchaeus didn't know why Jesus would come to his home. But he was very grateful. And he began to see his life from a different perspective. He said he would give away half of everything he had to the poor or to those in need. And if he had cheated anybody, he would pay them back 4 times as much. Jesus said, "Today, salvation has come to this house." And they enjoyed sitting around the table, sharing the evening meal. When Jesus got closer to Jerusalem, he stopped at Bethany, at the home of Simon the leper. And while they were sitting having supper, a woman came. Nobody knew who she was, but she had a beautiful alabaster jar of perfume. And she walked right up to Jesus and opened it and poured it all over his head. That was like another time when Jesus was at the home of Martha and Mary in Bethany. Their brother Lazarus had been raised from the dead by Jesus. And his sister Mary came and poured expensive ointments on Jesus' tired and dusty feet, and then wiped them with her hair. Martha was in the kitchen cooking when Mary did this. But this was a woman that no one knew in the home of Simon the leper. And the disciples, when they saw what the woman had done, were very angry. They said the woman had wasted it. They could have sold the perfume and given the money to the poor. But Jesus said, what this woman has done was a good thing. You will always have the poor with you, and you can be kind to them whenever you want. But I will not always be with you. She has anointed my head and my body for burial. And wherever my story is told, her story will also be told. For she has done a good thing. And everyone in the room was silent. And the woman went away. There's a lot of wondering we could do about this story. You might want to pause the video and wonder about where you are in this story, or what part of it is especially for you today, as you begin to think about what your response to this story might be. I'm going to put it away though. We put it away in reverse order so that it's ready for the next time someone comes into the room and may want to work with it. The woman who anointed Jesus. And Jesus sitting at table with Zacchaeus, despite what everybody said. A reminder to love God and to love others as ourselves. The greatest commandments. And to welcome a child is another way to come close to God. Even the blind could truly see. And the teaching about Sabbath and the law and the importance of worshiping God. And the feeding of the 5,000. The Beatitudes, sometimes called the blessings. The calling of those fishing folk. I wonder if you've heard God's call in your life. And the worship in the synagogue in Nazareth. Those three key moments: the Annunciation, Transfiguration, and Resurrection. And this most curious box, and the underlay from Holy Week. I'm going to pause and move the camera, and if you need to gather up your materials, feel free to pause the video to do that. Welcome back. I wonder what you found to work with. I'm not feeling very creative these days somehow, or I just feel like I want to paint, and we've painted already. So then I thought, well, it could never really go wrong with glitter. So I have the jar of glitter and some glue, tissue paper, and a pencil, and a piece of dark colored paper so that the glitter will show up a little bit more. I think I've been thinking more about that Epiphany time. The time when the Magi set out to follow that wild star, and it led them to someplace unexpected. And then in a dream, God came to them and told them to go home a different way. And so I've been practicing as I drive around town or as I walk different places to go a different way on my way home than I do on my way there. Just to see if that makes a difference or if I notice something different. So I wonder what different ways you've noticed of being. Maybe you're the kind of person who just really likes familiar things. So you don't try a different item at a restaurant, or even a different restaurant, or maybe you just kind of have your own routine and you stick to that. I think this glitter is going to stick to everything, which is just kind of fun. I'm generally somebody who doesn't mind trying new things, except when I go out to eat. And I think that comes from days when we never had a lot of money. And so if I was going to splurge and eat out, I wanted to make sure it was something I would enjoy. So I would kind of get to where I had the same thing that I ordered. But sometimes it was good to try something different. And every now and then, I do. I'm not sure you could say I follow a wild star. I think in a lot of ways I'm pretty predictable. But I like to think I'm predictable in a good way. I laugh easily. I like to make puns. There are many changes in our lives, and it's good for us to figure out different ways of being, and that we don't always get to follow the same route. I remember hearing someone say it was good how our brain helps us do some of that work in a good way, but also in a way I think that's a little bit problematic. And they talked about it being like people that walk across the grass in a park, right? If you're taking a shortcut to go somewhere, and that you kind of wear out that path, and you can tell where people have traveled a lot simply because of that wear. So that path with lots of sparkles on it that helps people see where they've been or where they need to go. And that helps us make some of those ordinary decisions throughout our day. The things about what am I going to have for breakfast? Should I go here, go there? Oh, that looks like a not safe place. I won't go there. Or that patch looks icy. So it helps eliminate all that thought, all that thinking that would just simply kind of bog down our decision making. But by the same token, we get so used to responding to some things in certain ways that it's hard to change that path. That's why maybe we talk about people who are in a rut or they're stuck. They're kind of just going the same way. And so every now and then I think it's good for us to practice those epiphany ways of being. Traveling by a different path. Maybe setting out to follow a star or trying something new or different and seeing where it leads. And it isn't always easy. And I'm not even convinced I know when it's a good thing. But I also know that as a person of faith, when I take time to talk with God before I set out, things usually work out a little bit better. Or if I'm even just paying attention to God along the way. And sometimes that means being surprised. But sometimes I think I know best, and I'll have a plan all set out. This is what I'm going to do. This is where I'm going to go. And then something comes up. Calls me in a different way. Think about those fishermen, James and John and Peter and Simon, Andrew. They had probably fished in those waters of Galilee their whole life. And their fathers had done that before them. Perhaps they were already starting to teach their children. And then along comes this traveling rabbi. And he says, "Follow me." and I will make you fishers of people. I don't think very many of us have done that, where you would just give up everything you've ever known. Head off to another career, another job, although people say that certainly the younger generations now are doing that a lot more than people of my generation did. It's kind of expected when I was growing up that you would get a job and probably stay in that job for most of your life. But now they anticipate with some of the mobility and the changing in economy that people will have many different jobs over the course of their lifetime. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Think about all the different jobs I've had over the course of my life, and I try to remind my kids when I see them agonizing about decisions that, nothing's ever wasted. Whatever job you do, there will be some skills, or you'll learn something, or it might just be how to get along with people you don't like, but you'll learn something if you're open. Maybe that's part of what bringing an epiphany mind to the work we do. Even when it's some of those really tedious things or boring things like having to do dishes or clean the cat litter, pick up the dog poop. All those things we'd really rather not have to do that are still out there, still need to be done. Maybe if we brought an epiphany mind to those activities, I wonder what we might discover if we looked for God in those places. Might even just be that we say thank you for having all those dishes to put away, for having all that food to clean up, or being so rich that we can afford to have pets. I wonder what you've noticed when you've tried something new. I wonder where you've noticed God calling you lately. It's not always easy to tell when it's God calling us or just those inner voices or other people's expectations that we sometimes hear. I think for me, what helps me test that call is to think about some of the possible results of that decision. Will it add to the love in my life or in the lives of others? Will it add to the goodness? Is it kind of in line with some of the things that Jesus talked about having abundant life and about caring for others or caring for this earth? And whose interests are being served? Is it just something I want to do because it'd be fun, and which is not necessarily something God doesn't want us to do. I think God does want us to enjoy life, but not at the expense of others or at the expense of this earth. I wonder how you discern God's call. Or how following Jesus has changed your life. It's certainly changed mine. I think mostly for the good, although there's been times when I've wondered. But it certainly let me meet all kinds of people I would never otherwise have met and live in places that I would never otherwise have lived. And experience things like godly play. All because someone invited me to be part of the story. I'm going to clean up my mess, and you might like to think about what you're going to get ready for feast, or if you want to do some more work on your own, feel free to do that. Other one that I had brought, thinking about Epiphany, that you can make with tissue paper and some white glue and a glass jar, is to make yourself a little nightlight. And you just put the white glue on the outside of the glass and spread that tissue paper around, and then paintbrush some more glue on it. You can put a handle on the lid and put one of those little tea lights inside it. And it might just remind you of the light that comes into our lives and invites us to follow. So we typically start our feast time with prayer, and sometimes when we're in the room, we use the offering basket. You might have an object that you like to pass around in your home as kind of a talking stick. So whoever's holding the object, it's their turn to talk and others listen. Sometimes we pray out loud. Sometimes we pray in silence. We might sing our prayers or shout them or dance them. What matters is that we pause from time to time in our day to say thank you. Holy love, thank you for calling us to be together, to be with you, to grow and to learn, to discover, and for gifting us with minds and bodies to taste and touch and see and hear and feel the wonders of the world around us. Fill us with curiosity. Equip us with courage to set out, to try new things. But most of all, to share the good news of your presence in our midst. Amen. Well, yes, I have a little bit of glue and glitter and a little bit of clay because I was filling up the clay jars a little while ago. But I have some water. And a muffin to share. Wonder what you have for your feast today. It's a time of year when I'm really missing having some fresh fruit. But I've been trying to be more careful about my shopping and not buy things when they're really out of season. It means they have to come from a very long ways away, which is not good for carbon footprint in the world. I wonder how you live your faith, or how being a person of faith shapes some of the decisions you make, whether that's getting ready in the morning and how long to let the water run when you brush your teeth, or how much water you use, whether you turn all the lights on in the house or just the ones you need, turn them off when you leave the room. Or how your faith shapes who you are at school or at work, or the way you spend your money, or your after school time. Sometimes we think that Jesus' call is just about big things. But I found that for most people, it's often in those little day-to-day decisions that we make choices that proclaim who we are and what we believe. Well, I hope you had some nourishing time today, whether that was with your response or in the story or the feast time or doing some wondering about the questions that we have. And before we know it, it's time to change the light and to say goodbye for another week. So watch what happens when I change the light, so that it isn't just in this one place and time, but it can spread out, be everywhere. I wonder where the light is being called. Some days it just spills out and goes with all kinds of energy, and today it's just hanging. It's just spreading out and kind of drifting and waiting in the air. Maybe it's waiting for us to join it in the world. Until we meet again, God bless, be well, and look after one another.